All right, picture this. You've built a fortress inside your own mind so impeccably, so flawlessly, that you realize way too late the doors have no handles on the inside. In today's Explainer, we're taking a philosophical, pretty grim deep dive into the shadows of human consciousness. We're going to explore the terrifying tension between the rigid, calcified order we use to protect ourselves and the liberating, though often chaotic, rupture required to set us free. Step carefully because the floorboards of this mental architecture are incredibly fragile. Our journey today is going to unfold in 5 stages. First, the Iron Architect's prison. Then 3 parables of its collapse: the papier-mâché mask, the liquid equations, and the dancing bones. And finally, we'll wrap up with constructive chaos and freedom. Let's get into it. Okay, let's dive right into part 1, the Iron Architect's prison. Look at this incredibly stark imagery for a second. We're following a protagonist known simply as the Wanderer. Now, this guy was desperate for absolute liberation. And his method? He wielded an iron hammer of genealogy to completely shatter the stained glass cathedrals of his ancestors. He used his merciless intellect to just smash the rotting ideals of the past. But, and here's the really tragic twist, instead of stepping out into the fresh air, he unknowingly gathered up the shattered debris of those old idols and used them to build himself a brand new cage. We call that cage the Infinite Dungeon. Now, to be clear, we are not talking about a physical place with iron bars. No, this is a psychological state of trauma and deep, deep isolation. The Wanderer tried to command the world using absolute certainty and calcified order, but by doing so, he trapped himself. He became stiff and breathless, absolutely terrified that a single wrong step would shatter his fragile internal landscape. He's left sitting there entirely alone, taunted only by his own shadow. And that shadow whispers the absolute cruelest truth: in his flight from the past, he had merely made the dungeon infinite. And this brilliantly illustrates the core conflict here. On one side, we have the Wanderer. He represents this terrifying rigidity, an existence completely frozen by the demand for absolute certainty. But over on the other side, we have the Antidote, the Living Ink siblings. They represent fluid, chaotic influence, and unpredictable whim. They act as this absolutely necessary rupture, stepping in to prevent the Wanderer's reality from just shattering completely under its own immense tension. Which brings us to our second stop, Section 2, the papier-mâché mask. I want to pose a question directly to you. Think about it. When someone builds an impenetrable fortress of intellect, this heavy armor of absolute certainty designed to keep the entire unpredictable world at bay, what do you think truly lies behind it? What is really powering that heavy machinery? Well, the answer is trembling hands. Hands hiding behind what turns out to be nothing more than a papier-mâché mask. This is where the eldest sibling, the Wit, steps in, acting as a distorting mirror. Just imagine the Wit's cynical laughter echoing through the dungeon, seemingly asking the Wanderer, "Is this all you really are?" He steps into the Wanderer's mind and uses that laughter to expose a profound truth. That formidable intellectual armor isn't iron at all, it's papier-mâché. By exposing the frightened, trembling hands trying to control everything behind that mask of authority, the Wit completely dismantles the Wanderer's ego. It's wild. He takes the grim, serious Gothic dusk of the Wanderer's mind and effortlessly flips it into a heap of delightful absurdity. Suddenly, those rigid walls of the mind are revealed to be a total farce, not a fortress.
All right, moving on to Section 3, the liquid equations.
Now, what's really interesting about this next phase is how the dismantling becomes entirely literal. The Wanderer is trying to navigate his prison using precise equations of isolation. He's mapped everything out perfectly to avoid getting hurt, but then enter the second sibling, the Hunger. Acting as a literal void in the logic, the Hunger seemingly answers the Wit's laughter by just inhaling the very threads of order the Wanderer relies on, swallowing his expectations like they were a nutritious meal. And as this happens, the rigid stone walls of the mind actually liquefy into a wet black slurry. The silence of his isolation is replaced by a complete cacophony of voices crying out, "How did this happen?" The Hunger literally devours the logic so the mind can never ever set into permanent stone again. Which sets us up perfectly for Section 4, the dancing bones. So, the crucial point here is to really grasp this escalating, necessary progression. What we're looking at is a perfectly structured dismantling of a trauma response. Step 1, the Wit dismantles the farce of the intellectual ego. Step 2, the Hunger devours the underlying internal logic keeping those walls up. And finally, Step 3, The small unbinds the actual physical rigidity that keeps the wanderer frozen. It is literally a masterclass in how chaotic rupture is sometimes deeply necessary to save us from ourselves. Man, I absolutely love this quote describing the youngest sibling, the small. She is the breeze that reminds a stiff, calcified world how to dance. Think about it. While the wanderer is stubbornly stomping around his frost-bitten crags in this rigid gait of absolute certainty, the small just sneaks in. She introduces artful mistakes. It might be a simple spilled lamp, or just a hiccup in the rhythm of the mountain. But these tiny injections of unpredictable whim are essential pressure valves. They force the wanderer out of his stiffness, basically teaching his calcified bones how to move naturally again. And that brings us to our final act, Section 5, Constructive Chaos and Freedom. Just witness this profound transformation. Over on the left side, we have the tragedy of forced order, the iron hammer, the isolating frostbitten crags, the infinite dungeon. But because of the chaotic, constructive intervention of those siblings, an entirely new state is achieved, the grand, unscripted comedy. The terrifying infinite dungeon actually collapses into an empty, sunlit amphitheater. That heavy, destructive iron hammer literally melts into a wooden jester's wand. Chaos, as we see in this explainer, is proven to be a highly constructive, deeply healing force. It saved the wanderer by unfreezing him, ultimately leaving the page damp and the ink wet so that he could finally, truly, write his next line. He moves from isolating intellectual armor straight into true creative freedom. Which leaves us with this final thought. The Wanderer's story is really a dark Gothic allegory for the walls we all build inside our own heads. So I have to ask, where in your life might you be constructing your own infinite dungeons of absolute certainty? Where are you demanding total control simply out of fear? And most importantly, what artful mistakes, what unpredictable whims do you need to allow into your life just to remind your own calcified bones how to dance? Something to think about. Thanks for exploring this with me today.